Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Brandon, when you got started buying rental properties, I understand the properties that you were buying weren't exactly the greatest properties. Tell me what they were like.
These were properties that weren't in very good areas. The condition was pretty bad. And I've gone through and fixed all these up. And now I'm at the point of transition, and I'm strongly thinking about selling a portion of these properties to be able to get 12 to 18 nicer properties free and clear with the equity that I've built into these, which would actually allow me to retire, maybe about 4 years sooner.
Brandon's got a great story. When he first got started buying rental properties, he had very little money, and he bought the cheapest, junkiest properties he could find. He fixed them up. He ended up creating a ton of equity, and now he's got the money to buy really nice properties in a great neighborhood with cash. On the podcast today, we're going to see how we pulled this off. Joining us on the show from Erie, Pennsylvania is Brandon Penn. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Brandon. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Brandon, let's start off by talking about your portfolio. Can you tell me a little bit about your properties?
Yeah, so the majority of the properties I own, I purchased on land contract and seller financing back between 2015 and 2019. Now, these were properties in rough areas, 1 to 4 units, and the properties themselves were in pretty bad condition. A good portion of them were rented and decent, but we did have quite a few vacancies that were uninhabitable that we had to go in and fix up.
And these are, it sounds like they're older properties.
Oh, yeah. So these are all in the city of Erie. So everything's, about 100 years old or a little older.
Was your plan when you bought these properties to buy them and then fix them up, like basically to do the BRRRR strategy with them? Or
So not quite the BRRRR. The plan, I did know the properties pretty well, so I knew that they were going to need a lot of work. The plan was to just use the cash flow to fix the properties up and, just pay on the land contract until they were free and clear. And then I would retire at 45, and, all the properties I bought up to the point once would have been paid off by the time I was 45.
All right. So the neighborhoods are not dangerous neighborhoods. They're just maybe older, like lower income neighborhoods.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Erie, as a whole isn't really a very dangerous city. It doesn't have parts like Philadelphia, Chicago, or New York have where you're worried about getting shot at 8:00 at night. There's definitely areas that are lower income. There are areas that are higher crime, but compared to a big city, we definitely, are safer.
All right. You mentioned that you bought them on a land contract. For anyone that's not familiar with that, can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so the ones that I bought on a true land contract, that is where the owner holds the deed and I pay the owner the mortgage, basically. And then once the final payment is made, the deed would transfer over to me.
Okay. All right. And are you managing your properties yourself?
I am, yes. So
okay.
I manage all of my properties, and then I'm a property manager for other investors as well.
So then it sounds like these properties are probably kind of management intensive with them being older. I've owned older properties before, and there's just weird stuff that comes up no matter how much you fix them up. Do you have a lot of repairs? And then also with being lower income, those tenants are a lot of times not that they're bad tenants, but they're maybe more management intensive.
Yeah, definitely. The older buildings, they're made so well, but the plumbing is ancient. The wiring is sometimes still knob and tube. Furnaces are older, water tanks are older. There's always a lot more maintenance that needs done with them. Than with some of the newer duplexes and things. And yeah, with being with lower income tenants, I mean, these folks are one car repair or, a lot of them do home health care. So they're one client passing away from not having the rent,
Right.
so they don't have a reserve fund. They don't have savings. They're really living paycheck to paycheck. So you definitely do have a lot more people management with these type of properties as well. I'm their counselor, I'm their bookkeeper,
Right.
So yeah, these folks don't have the same education as a lot of us do. So we just have to be willing to, get in there and help them and teach them things that we would think would be common sense. Not things that normally we would expect to have to do as a landlord.
So right now, with the cash flow right now, are you spending that or living on that, or does that money just go into fixing the properties up as someone moves out or as you improve them?
Yeah, so that money is all going back into the properties because again, these are basically my retirement funds.
Okay.
So any extra money that we do get on them, we pick projects like siding or maybe a new roof or windows or something to make them nicer. So yeah, we run at like a break even on these just because we're siphoning everything back into the properties.
And how many rentals do you have right now?
So I have about 150 doors right now.
All right. So walk me through the plan here. So you want to sell off some of these properties and then trade up to better neighborhoods?
Yeah. So that's actually something I've just started focusing on like the last 6 months. I plan to sell off about 70 of these doors that I have. Which will allow me to get between 12 to 18 nicer single family homes and nicer areas. That would be a lot less management intensive. And that's really what's been able to make me do that is the equity that we've built into the properties just from what we've fixed up along with, the price spikes after COVID and everything. These were worth quite a bit more than when I originally bought them. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to do it. And I think something that everybody should be looking at is always kind of trading up your portfolio and taking that equity and buying better properties. And that makes so much sense. So tell me about the neighborhoods that you're going to buy in.
Yeah, so the surrounding suburbs are where I'm going to be looking at. For those that know Erie, it would be like Wesleyville, parts of Mill Creek, the nicer school districts. The properties cost a little bit more, so they don't exactly make sense when you have to get a mortgage versus the rent. But if, let's say, I can buy a $150,000 house cash and rent it out for $1,500, at that point, it makes sense to do.
Yeah, I mean that's meeting the 1% rule, so that's still pretty good. So in these properties that they should be easier to manage, you're probably going to have way less maintenance because they're newer properties, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And two, with them being single family, the majority of what I own right now are duplexes. I do have some single families. I do have 3 and 4 units as well. But I have found through both what I own and what I manage for other people, single family houses, I get, less than a quarter of the calls that I do on a duplex.
So having less properties, but having those properties be less management intensive, having them probably you're going to be spending less money on repairs. Do you think that having less properties will actually end up netting you more money at the end of the day?
Well, it will, and using the compound effect, I'll actually be able to retire a few years sooner than I originally anticipated because I'll be able to take all the money from these properties and buy more properties, which then give me more cash flow. So, yeah, as I said before, the original properties I have are highly leveraged. But when I sell those, that's going to give me a nice chunk of change that I could buy these cash, and then I don't have the debt service
Right,
anymore.
right. Yeah, so you're taking some risk off the table there too.
Yep.
Now, have you considered maybe taking some of the equity out of the older properties and using that to buy the new properties? Like, and that
I
way you
have,
can
yeah.
that way you can keep the old properties. Like, why did you decide against that?
Well, one of the reasons is appraisers in Erie are kind of behind the times on on prices and things. They keep trying to keep things low. Whereas if I get an out of state appraiser that sees the big picture, I mean, we can usually get higher values. But really, the idea is to sell these properties to someone that would still use me for management. So I would still have control of the property, but then I would have the chunk of change that I'd want to go buy the nicer properties.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So you're getting your management fee on the properties that you don't own anymore. And now
Right.
you've got the new properties free and clear. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it also makes management a little bit easier if I roll them into my property management, because I have everything that I manage run under one software called AppFolio through my brokerage. So I would just roll these ones into that as well. Whereas right now, all my personal stuff's being run through Tenant Cloud, and then with the management stuff being on AppFolio, there's two different programs I'm going through. So it would just make management easier on my end.
So now I'm curious to hear more about when you first got started. So it sounds like when you got started, you didn't have a lot of money. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have the money to be able to go get a traditional mortgage, and put 20% down, that way. So I had to get kind of creative with things and approach owners for seller financing and land contracts.
So did you put any money down on the properties when you initially bought them?
So in 2015, we bought 12 doors, and for those, we did put about $10,000 down of our own money. It was my mother and I. So we had decided we wanted to get a couple more rentals because we only had two at that time. So I reached out to another investor that I had met with my real estate dealings, asking if he had anything he'd be willing to sell on land contract. And he said that he had just gotten these ones back from a bank that basically begged him to take them over because they didn't want it on their books. And these properties were just in horrid condition. You wouldn't let a dog live there. I mean, they were horrible. And we went in, totally revamped them. Fixed them up nice and put good tenants in there. Fast forward a little bit further, a year or two after that, I was working for Jason, the gentleman we bought those first 12 from. And instead of like raises and things like that, for my W-2 income, we had kind of worked out a deal that I would take over any of the properties that he wanted to kind of offload as he was getting on into bigger things with syndication and stuff like that, moving into the bigger complexes. So on those ones, I didn't have to put any money down.
So the only money that you put down on your entire 150 rentals was that initial $10,000?
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. And then to think that after, what is it, like 7 or 8 years that you've been buying since you bought your first property?
Yep. So, I mean, there's a little bit more to the story there because, I mean, the renovations we did on those first 12, I mean, we did all those on store lines of credit cards, things like that. So, I mean, we did use our credit to buy those things, to fix those up. But to buy them, it was just the 10. And then from there on out, it was the land contracts that I didn't have to put any money down. But I actually got away from those once we hit a hiccup with trying to refinance those original 12. And I moved into private lending and seller financing. So for those that don't know, the difference between a land contract and seller financing, the seller financing, the deed does transfer. and the owner acts just as the bank.
Okay. All right. So you've got your 10 grand and you have turned that 10 grand into hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
Do you think most of the appreciation that you've made, was it from fixing the properties up or was it from the market appreciating?
It was really half and half. I mean, the market appreciation had a huge amount to do with it, but putting the money into fixing these up was definitely a big part of the picture as well.
Tell me more about the refinance. So you bought these on the land contract. Did you have trouble trying to refinance the properties?
Yeah, we definitely ran into some walls. I thought we had the secret sauce, and we were so smart because we were going to buy these properties, fix them all up with store lines of credit, credit cards, all this stuff, and then refinance. Right? Get your money back and pay everything off and be good. So we get the package all together to get to the banks, and then we get hit with, oh, your debt's too high. We can't give you a loan because you have all these credit card balances. And it's like, yeah, that's why we're trying to get this loan, these credit cards. And so we didn't realize that, what was going to cost us that. So, over the next few years, we took the money from the rent to pay down those credit cards and pay those things off so that we could be bankable. Go to the banks again, get through maybe 3/4 of the refinance process to at the final hour, just be told, oh, these are land contracts. The deeds haven't transferred, so we can't treat these as refinances. So that was another big block that we hit. So from there, I mean, this whole process took about 6 years to complete, start to finish, from us, buying and trying to refinance them to actually refinancing it. And finally, it worked because over this time, I was building a relationship with a local bank that actually held the mortgages on these properties. And we came up with a creative solution of they would release the deeds so that the deeds could go over to my name, but they would keep the personal guarantee in place on Jason. So and then Jason had his mortgages to me. So then I would pay Jason the money, Jason would pay the bank the money, and we were able to then get them refinanced.
My biggest takeaways from talking to you and hearing your story is that the most important thing that someone can do is just get started. I mean, when you first started, you did whatever you had to do to buy those first properties. And because you bought those properties, now you're able to move up and trade up to better properties. I think that's so hard to see when you're first getting started, that the way that things are right now aren't the way they're always going to be. It's just getting those first properties and getting going. Did you have any idea that buying those first properties that were, a lot of them in really bad shape, did you have any idea that would lead you to being able to buy all these other properties free and clear one day?
No. So, I mean, that was never the original intent, right? The intent was just to pay these off and then live off cash flow. So, I mean, it definitely put me in a totally different world than I thought I'd be. And yeah, I mean, I'd agree with you that the most important thing is to get started. I mean, you definitely have to have a roadmap, plan out what you're wanting to do, and try to look at the big picture. But just get started on the work. And I think as important as that is to just keep going, right? I mean, failures are only lessons until we quit. Once we quit, that's when they're failures.
Right.
So it's huge. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, just looked at me like I had two heads and are like, why are you doing this stuff? Like, just quit. Like you're like stressed out. You're putting all this work in and you're not getting anything of it. Like, why are you doing this? But I just held on to my vision of what I wanted my life to be in the future. And I knew that, temporary hardships now would lead to, great gains in the future.
Yeah. And the other big takeaway is that you've been so creative with when you come across a roadblock, you found creative ways to get through it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd really would attest that to being my stupidity. I was I didn't come from a banking world. I mean, I knew real estate. I became a realtor and stuff like that, but I didn't know the investment world like I really should have. So I just asked all the dumb questions, and I was like, can we do this? Can we do that? And, eventually the no's became like, I've never been asked that.
Right.
And like that led to the creative solutions we figured out because I was too dumb to know that was a question I shouldn't have asked.
Yeah. We'll have to get Brandon back on the podcast when he gets these properties sold. He gets his new properties up and running, and we'll see how everything worked out for him. If anyone is interested in learning more about investing in Erie and you want to reach out to Brandon, as he mentioned, he's a realtor and a property manager, and he'd be happy to connect with you. I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 459. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She's a nationwide lender, and she can help you finance your property. She's got a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. If you want to find out more, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you follow the podcast. I put out a new interview every single Tuesday, and if you're following the show, you'll get notified as soon as the next episode comes out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.